Thank you very much, Chair, and hello to everyone. I'm Duncan from Glasgow City Council, and it's a real privilege to speak here today and especially to engage in what I think is becoming an increasingly fascinating and important debate about the links between climate, carbon, and public health, one which I think is going to be a legacy of Glasgow having hosted COP26 in a mere few days' time. And I'm going to talk about the city and place I know best, which is Glasgow and is the proud host city of the UN Climate Change Conference, COP26. But in doing so, I've no warrant for thinking Glasgow to be unique, though I do think it's distinct in many interesting ways. And in many of those ways, it can therefore stand proxy for other cities around the world and other places with which you yourselves will be far more familiar. And in that respect, there's a key message, I suppose, I want to get across about Glasgow's journey to net zero and that of many other places around the world in the context of COP26. And it's simply this, that whilst nation states make pledges at places like COP, and sometimes in the past have struggled to agree all that much, I'm afraid to say, it is cities which are delivering on the promise of a low carbon, climate resilient and just future for our people. And that's something that I'm going to come back to throughout the words I'm about to say. And it's a key point I want you to keep in mind. And also, I suppose, it's about transformation. I know this is a glib and often overused word, but if it has traction and meaning and purchase anywhere, then it is in a place like Glasgow, which has seen the waves of economic and social history break against it. And in many ways, Glasgow is, again, a city that leads the way in that distinct urban experience for many other places around the world, because we were once a titan of the industrial age, and we've lost that. But now we are trying to become a different kind of city, one that has a cleaner and greener economy and society that reaches out to many other cities and places throughout the world on a similar narrative. And that is very much about some key challenges for ourselves here in Glasgow and for cities around the world. Heat and decarbonising it is a key issue. And you will have heard just recently UK government discussions about that and about what that might mean. And for a city like Glasgow, with a very distinct built form where 70% of us live in flats, and how you decarbonise tenemental housing stock is a real challenge. And therefore, it isn't simply about some of the technology of a district heating system or of a renewable heat system. It is about the built environment. It is about how you engage across the different sectors of social and private housing. And it is also, especially these days, about travel and transport. Transport as a sector has now become the single most significant contributor to greenhouse gas emissions in Glasgow, in Scotland, and indeed in the UK. So clearly there's a challenge there. As the cake of carbon emissions has gone down, the proportion taken up by transport has increased because it hasn't gone down as much as, for instance, decarbonising electricity. But we know that that is at the heart of the debate we need to have about ensuring our travel system not only shifts towards cleaner one for both greenhouse gas emissions and also improving air quality, key public health issue, but fundamentally, as all of you will know, one of the most evidence-based and low-tech interventions any of us can engage in for public health is walking and cycling around a lot more. And so there's obviously a twin approach there in terms of public health and sustainability. And another twin approach, my third point here today, is that we're very clear in Glasgow, as many other cities around the world also are, that sustainability must go together with social justice, especially for our most vulnerable population who have been left behind before as the economy and society has shifted from different modes of production towards a different kind of approach. And therefore, we're very keen to ensure that what we do offers opportunities for people, that we can have that transition in ways that are, in the words of the Scottish Just Transition, managed and orderly, rather than in the past, as our experience has shown, unmanaged and disorderly. And if we are to do that, then rather more prosaically, but absolutely importantly, we need to talk about money, because whilst Glasgow is not short of ambition, we are, however, somewhat short of the capital by which to mobilise that ambition in our people's lives and in their neighbourhoods and in the economy of the city. So one of the opportunities we'll be using at COP26 is to reach out especially to government, but also to the capital markets, knowing that many of the companies involved in the pensions and insurance sectors are looking to divest from fossil fuels. and therefore may have the orphan capital with which to fund many of the ideas we want around heat and around transport and around a just transition. And like many other cities, Glasgow itself has declared a climate emergency. We did so 2.5 years ago in 2019, and followed that with our commitment to reach net zero carbon emissions by 2030, a full 10 years ahead of that target for Scotland and 15 ahead of that for the UK. And we used the opportunity to relaunch a partnership called Sustainable Glasgow, which brings together public, private and academic sectors, again, an experience shared across many other cities, and also launched our climate plan this summer in 2021, the front cover of which you see before you in the image of those Glaswegian school children there, a key sense of the future being delivered as we speak, with all sorts of different commitments. And I'd urge you to have a look at that and to engage with it to the extent that you are from Glasgow yourself. And going back to what I said here, the issues around decarbonising heat, but also delivering, crucially, affordable warmth for our people in a context where fuel poverty remains a big issue, is one where Glasgow, like many other cities, has a multiplicity of strategies and policies and plans and statements, which we know now through our Sustainable Glasgow partnership, we need to pull together. And the image you have before you is of all of these coming together to form something called a local heat and energy efficiency strategy, which is being pioneered through the Scottish Government with local authorities, and we'll be publishing very shortly. And that will look at those multiple issues of reducing emissions, delivering affordable warmth, and getting good green jobs as we do so, which is a crucial equation we know we need to get right here in Glasgow. In terms of transport as well, again, the single most significant sector for emissions, but the issue of mobility justice comes up in a place like Glasgow where less than 50% of us actually own cars. So poor air quality from road traffic is not from our own vehicles, but from commuters coming in. So we need to do things about that. And the image on your left is of Kelvin Way, for those of you who know Glasgow, which has been shut to vehicular traffic as an intervention to deal with COVID. In a city where so few of us have gardens, the importance of green space and access to it is very, very important. And the means by which we can ensure people are walking, wheeling and cycling becomes much more significant too, where car ownership, again, is very low. And on the right, you see the image of another policy called Connecting Glasgow, which is the production of a connectivity commission in Glasgow, looking at how we make that shift to cleaner and greener transport and more active travel. And just over the last weeks, the council's announced plans for hundreds of kilometres of a new active travel network in the city, and we'll be consulting on that. And again, I'd urge you to check the website for the council and look at that. But also, I want to talk a little bit about the economy, and I've picked up a quotation here from Nye Bevan about how we used to conceive not only of our economy, but perhaps of our society, of how we treated people. A lump of coal surrounded by fish. In other words, you extract things, you use them up, and then you throw them away, often in landfill. And perhaps sometimes the workforce itself has felt subject to that same approach. And we know we need to shift towards a much cleaner, greener, and more circular, less extractive approach to the economy. And that's something that in Glasgow, through the production of a circular economy strategy, in conjunction with our colleagues from the Chamber of Commerce, is going to lead the way. And that's really significant. What some of those things are going to look like? Well, things like housing retrofit, working with our partners and the nearby local authorities to look at more than 420,000 domestic properties for a potential retrofit program, where, as I said earlier, you reduce emissions, you deliver affordable warmth, and you produce green jobs in the supply chain, which cannot be outsourced or offshored because they need to be very local. And some of those COVID interventions I mentioned earlier as well, about green space and about walking and cycling, will come into that as well. But we also know that we've locked in changes to our local weather because of climate change globally, and that therefore adaptation to increased rainfall and to summer heat is going to become much more important too. So we need to do these things together, both deliver on emissions reductions, but recognise that we need to adapt as a city, as a place, and with our people. And that suggests as well that whilst technology is vital, much of it is already on the shelf. It's innovation perhaps around governance and the finance with which we can mobilise this technology that's becoming more significant. And therefore, we need to search ourselves and ask some quite difficult questions about whether really we're in the right position to deliver on these things with the kinds of institutions and the arrangements we have, be that at national or local government level and all points in between. And that's a very lively debate we're going to be having with ourselves and with others in coming months. particularly as a legacy of having hosted COP and been able to see what the rest of the world and other cities are doing. And one of those things, of course, will be looking at a Green New Deal. A report's just been published by the Council. I'd urge you to look at it, that begins to set out some of the principles and to look at skills, look at the practical issues of what do you do for someone who currently fixes your gas boiler to retrain them for a heat pump, someone who fixes your diesel engine, how to ensure they can work with a hydrogen fuel cell, for instance. Not impossible, but ones where colleges, universities and schools need to work together to make sure we can make a reality out of the well-meaning principles of a just transition. And in that light, I don't know how well people can see my screen here, but there is history we need to draw upon, and history that we have previously been able to enact. This is a page from the Empire Exhibition Catalogue from 1938, held in Bellahouston Park in Glasgow, from the wonderfully titled Glasgow Corporation Electricity Department, about reducing the cost of the utility to residents. In other words, we used to do these things. We as a city delivered these things, as well as clean water and affordable public transport. Some of those things have subsequently been taken out of our hands. We may want to think again in terms of governance, ownership, and local production, how we do these things. And one of the big issues around heat in particular is the extent to which we move away from a national grid and to much more locally produced energy, heat and electricity. And this in a way shows that we've done those things under far more trying circumstances in the 1930s, and we might want to be thinking about doing them again. It's just speculative on my part, but I think it's a good example of how we need to think quite differently and draw upon our own history. So finally, we want to achieve good things for Glasgow and for Glaswegians. And we always say that achievement for Glasgow will be success for Scotland and the UK in terms of that earlier point I made in my introductory remarks about urban leadership. So by 2030, a mere 9 years' time, we want to see a city that's just and fair for its people, that delivers a net zero emissions target, and that is resilient to the changes brought about by local weather impacts in the light of global climate change, that we're resilient also to other things coming up in terms, for instance, of changes to the jobs market brought about by what we hope is a green revolution in the economy. But we also know, and to the extent that I talked in terms of what might sound like an invitation for people in hard hats with bulldozers to arrive on your doorstep, and in no small measure it is indeed just that, it is also about working with nature and working to ensure that we can use green infrastructure to help us to become more climate resilient, to deal with increased rainfall, increased summer heat and so forth. And planting trees, of course, is very significant. Glasgow's been doing that a lot recently with a Clyde Children's Forest and many other things. But on a global scale, planting trees is all well and good. But offsetting your emissions through that is no real exchange for stopping cutting down the forests we already have and for radically reducing our emissions. We're very, very aware of that. My third point here is about quality of life, about saying, yes, we must become green because we have planetary responsibilities, and hopefully the world will come to its senses at COP26 and help us along there with an agreement at the end of the event. But equally, we want a place that's good for Glaswegians, that's just, sustainable, and offering good jobs and a good place to come and visit and live, that's connected to our biodiversity and to the broader natural world. Because finally, my point is, I don't offer any apologies for using narrative and storytelling, because actually great cities open new chapters in their histories all the time through the political will of city leaders and through the engagement with people. And there is now an opportunity, of course, to do so again. We stand on the cusp of a huge change to a net zero city and nation. And in I might paraphrase Marx, we indeed make our own history, but of course we do not do so under circumstances of our choosing. And at this particular point, with COVID and the climate emergency both coming together, we know that that is more profound than ever. But one last point. To the extent that much of what I've said is about big institutions talking to one another, it fundamentally has to be about engaging with our citizens and people in the rich diversity of their lived experience. And I know that's a point that many of you will realize from the places you live, because in terms of the social determinants of health, climate is now becoming one of them, and locus of control, being involved, having a sense of agency, is going to become much more significant for our people, as it always has been in terms of family and community health. And people will make Glasgow resilient if the institutions which serve them, like the council, can work with them. And that's at the heart of our conception of a greener and cleaner Glasgow that makes that journey and transition to net zero. Thank you for listening, and I'm very happy to take questions.